This week on Supercars Torque, I discuss the conundrum that is Gary Rogers Motorsport. So interesting times with Gary Rogers Motorsport. We see a lot of comments on the internet. A lot of the keyboard warriors are getting out there and really putting their feelings forward on what they should be doing with the team. A lot of these probably misguided opinions. Just want to have a bit of a chat about what kind of conundrum the teams are in these days. So essentially what we have, Gary Rogers Motorsport a few years ago, they're kicking goals, they had the Fujitsu backing, they had this young bloke, Scott McLaughlin, things like that. The Fujitsu money was going away, but it all timed in nicely where they picked up the Volvo deal, and that was all good. They had good money rolling in with the Volvo deal, they had their few sponsors, things like that. They had obviously a brilliant driver in Scott McLaughlin. Let's not get into what the teammates were doing. Everything was ticking along nicely. Then Volvo kind of pulled the rug out from underneath them. They had to go, back to Commodores. They lost all that, the factory funding from the Volvo deal, go back to buying engines. They purchased their engines off Walkinshaw. And then their funding level, I don't think Wilson and that, they were obviously putting in money, but I think probably Volvo money was up here and all of a sudden then their budget went down to here because you had, your Wilson money and then your Volvo money to bring it up, and then all of a sudden they're trying to operate here while they're having to buy engines in and things like that, and Garth Tander, they brought him in. He probably ended up actually costing them more than what Scott McLaughlin was costing at the time, things like that. So, it hasn't been smooth sailing for them the last few years, and I see a lot of, people on the internet, saying, "I'll just go and get a sponsor." It's not that easy. So, they had the conundrum at the end of last year. They knew Wilson was pulling out. They'd been a great backer in the sport for a long time, nothing against that. It had run its course, these things happen. And although they hadn't confirmed Garth Tander, they hadn't said anything to him like, we're not going to have you for next year. So everyone thought that was ticking along. Garth thought, probably 2019 will be my last year full time, and then I'll have a bit of a semi-retirement, do a co-driver role. So I think over the off season we had a bit of a situation where Walkinshaw had maybe got the mega money and kind of trying to shuffle Boost out the door possibly. I think the mega kind of came to Walkinshaw before Boost left. So Boost kind of they wanted to sponsor team. They wanted to be all part of this. They came along to Gary Rogers, said we want to sponsor you, but we've got this youthful kind of brand that we're trying to that's what we're trying to develop. We don't want, the geriatric Garth Tander. He's only a few years older than me, I think, so he's not that old. But he didn't fit in with the marketing that they wanted. So, I don't think they specifically came along and said, we want Richie Stanaway, but they then said, right, who can we look at, who's available? And Richie had just come on the market, getting the ass from Tickford. And he's got that kind of, edgy, youthful kind of thing that Boost were after. Not sure if I was, marketing, might not have gone along that route. I'd probably prefer someone, a bit more like Will Brown, that's a bit more fun in that. But, that's what they chose. They chose Richie. So this is where it comes, a lot of people are saying Gary's sold out. So you need sponsorship, and all the way down the pit lane, I did a video, recently about, the pay drivers and all of that kind of thing. And, it's people bringing budgets and things like that. And then sponsors wanting to get involved, like say, Castrol at Kelly Racing, they want, Rick Kelly there as a previous V8 Supercar champion. The same with Irwin at Charlie Sherkwott's operation. Irwin wouldn't be there without someone like Mark Winterbottom. And you have similar things like that all through the field. So Boost's come along, they've decided they want to drive it like Richie Stanaway. Gary's agreed to that because didn't have any sponsorship for his team. What do we do? He hasn't got an endless amount of money to prop the team up. Like, there's a couple of owners out there. Obviously, Roger Penske's probably the richest one out of the lot that could probably go, here's a couple of million, let's keep it going while we don't have some sponsorship. So you might, what's the big deal about sponsorship? Well, you're probably looking, these cars, I've heard some wild reports, but you're probably looking at somewhere between $2 and $5 million to run a car for a year. Obviously, some of the tail end Charlies are probably running around that, kind of $2 million mark, and then obviously you kind of your 888s and Penske's and that, probably somewhere around that $5 million mark to run a car each year. So that's a big chunk of money. And as far as I know at the moment, for your racing entitlements contract, you get revenue from the TV deal and all that kind of thing. Long story short on that, basically, I think the teams at the moment are getting probably somewhere around that $500,000-$600,000 mark. That's what I'm hearing. So if you look at your level of sponsorship and that, and so if you need a minimum of $2 million to run a car, you get 500 for your rec. So you then, just to kind of run around the back of the field, you've got to kind of find that $1.5 million, and that's not including if you got a guy like Garth Tander, maybe if you had a word with him, he might do it at a bit of a bargain basement rate, but I don't think he's at that point in his career where he'd go, I'll come and do that for free. There is probably a few guys who would do that, but I won't get into those guys too much. But I think, Tander's won a championship, things like that. I think you'd have to pay him at least a couple $100,000 to keep him going around for the year. And that adds onto your budget as well. So essentially you put yourself in Gary Rogers' shoes and, he's got 2 cars, say they're getting $1 million for their rec income. That means you've probably got to find somewhere around the $3 million mark for sponsorship. You've probably got, like your Valvolines and people like that. They're, you probably get them tipping in around $1 million. That's still a big chasm to find. Like that's a lot of money to find. If you've got something like Boost coming along, and I'm only making up figures here, but say they go, right, we'll give you, $3 million. We want to be across both cars, etc. $1.5 million for each car. We just dictate who are the drivers. We're happy with James Goulding in the car. He's youthful, whatever. He's got the long locks, and he fits that kind of edgy attitude we want. How about we put this guy, Richie, in the car? What's the contract situation with Garth happening over there? Well, we haven't actually got a contract with Garth for next year, so we can kind of, it's going to be awkward. And they go, well, we don't care. That's the lineup we want. There's no contracts being broken, anything like that. Bit of a handshake and that, but, and I'm a big Garth Tander fan, but, watching him kind of trundle around the back in a, GRM car for another year, or now we've got him with Shane at the endurance races at 888, I think I'd prefer to see him, pedalling a front-running car in his latter days. I suppose a bit like watching Scafie struggle at HRT trying to run the whole thing and that, and then, watching him go to 888 and, having a really good run there with Lowndes for a couple of years. As a Tander fan, I think I'd prefer to see that. Yeah, it wasn't handled the best the way they dumped him, but it's a business decision that probably had to be made to keep Gary Rogers Motorsport going. So there's also a lot of rumours that Peter Adderton hasn't been shy in saying that he wants to own a team. Gary Rogers and Barry Rogers, they're not getting any younger. This could be an exit plan for them. it all ties in pretty nicely. I don't see it as a thing like you see all these keyboard warriors saying things like, Peter Adderton's trying to drive down the price of the team and things like that. Well, you know, yeah, you wouldn't be pumping in a heap of money. I'm sure he signed a 3-year contract to sponsor the team as well. It's not like he only signed on for 1 year. This is a long-term thing. Yeah, there's been, he turned around in the press the other week and said something like, I challenge, we'll put Richie in a Triple Eight car and put Lowndes in our car and, see who's fastest. If Lowndes is still faster, I'll give him 50 grand. It's just a showboating thing. I can't see Triple Eight, agreeing, let's let Richie go loose in one of our cars and trash it kind of thing, or, try and get some of the state secrets from it. But yeah, this is the kind of thing that he's doing, trying to get Boost Mobile in front and centre, everyone talking about it, everyone to go and buy their mobile phones. So as I've said, the whole thing wasn't handled really well. I think if it wasn't for the fact that we all thought Garth Tander was going to be in the seat this year, if they'd been quite open about it and said, well, not so much open about it, but if we all knew that Garth didn't have a contract and things like that, that it was a bit up in the air, they didn't know who was going to sponsor the team. And if there'd been talk about, them bringing on board, a pay driver for next year, a bit like what we're looking with Matt Stone Racing at the moment, they've been quite open to say, Todd Hazelwood, we might not have a seat for you next year. Maybe you should look elsewhere and see where your options are at. Maybe if Gary had said, said to Garth, you might not have a seat here next year. It depends on, if someone comes along with a big bag of cash, and it's a bit different that instead of it being a driver coming along with the sponsorship package, it was a sponsor coming along with a big bag of cash and then saying, no, we want these other drivers. That happens all the time. Like sponsors, they're paying the money, let them dictate, well, to an extent, they can dictate the drivers. We saw in Formula One, Williams and Lotus having Pastor Maldonado driving for them, or because the sponsor was coming along with a big bag of cash and saying, this is the man we want in the car. So at the end of the day, it's a bit sad that Gary Rogers is kind of in this position, This is the team that they've kind of had a bit of a championship run a few times, like back in the day with Tander. McLaughlin looked pretty good in the Volvo a few years ago. They have gone and won Bathurst. They did do the Monaro 24-hour program with Holden back in the day. At the moment, they're a bit of a shadow of their former self. Probably wouldn't take too much to turn them around. Maybe if they found the right driver for next year. A lot of people are saying put Pither in the car. Unfortunately, I think Pither's a good driver, but I don't think he's the answer. I think you need someone like a McLaughlin, someone, who is just, a kind of freak that's going to lift the team up to that next level. Jimmy Golding, Chris Pither, people like that are, not on that next level. It is going to be hard for them to find someone like that, but you never know. And, maybe if Peter Addison opens up his checkbook a bit more, maybe he might find someone like that. They've got a, great group of guys there. They're probably spreading themselves a little bit thin at the moment with the TCR stuff and the S5000 stuff and that, there's probably a bit of resources, but this is all things that they've kind of, I think they've taken them on because of the sponsorship and kind of where the sports are at. I think they're going to be on the grid next year. I don't see too much of an issue there, but, maybe, this cost-saving talk and that is good for a team like GRM because it has got to the point where, something like the Volvo pulling out really does affect them in the long term. So, I'd love to hear if you've got any, questions or comments or your opinion on the whole thing. Comments down below. So, until next time, I'll see you later.
Put away your inhibitions. Let the beast in you just get loose. We all young, wild, and